Okay, refresh.
Refreshing.
Let's see if we're live.
Testing. Loading. Oh, you're supposed to go live as two men. Exit out.
I don't think I can.
Oh, really? Okay,
It doesn't-
whatever.
This is fine.
This is fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's pin to featured
And then make sure that it's pinned to top.
and then go to announcements. Free workshop about
That's it.
light. That's the one. And we're pinning the top so everybody can find it.
All right. Thanks for
Okay.
being here, everyone.
Yes, thank you very much for showing up. Everybody, I see some people coming in. That's great.
Okay, we'll give everybody, we'll wait till 10:02.
60 seconds.
We're very punctual people, so we're going to wait.
60 seconds
Yes.
for everybody to come through the doors here.
Hey, Kathy.
Say hi. Let us know where you're chiming
See,
in
I
from.
told you, Dan Dalster is asking if you're cold.
What's that?
Dan Dalster is asking if you're cold.
I'm a little chilly this morning. Dan?
Yeah, he's wearing his down jacket. I'm like, why are you wearing your down jacket? You're normally shirtless. And he's like, well, I like it.
Okay. Also, just let us know. We want to make sure we're coming through loud and clear. You can hear us.
I
You
know
can see us.
the
Resolution.
isn't great. We're working on that. We've got some guy coming in a few days to actually hardwire our internet so that hopefully we don't have these resolution problems.
Okay. So I think we're good to go. Are we good to go, guys? Should we start?
Yeah.
Okay.
Start.
So thanks a lot for being here. Really appreciate you showing up for this. This is
The
the first little workshop in a series of 4 that we're doing,
Mhm.
right? We're going to do, this one's on light, then composition,
Mhm.
then moment, okay, the big 3. And then the last one, the 4th one's going to be the Holy Grail. Okay, it's
All
the
3 wrapped into one,
trifecta.
which is the trifecta,
It's
which
the
is
Holy Grail.
obviously which we're trying to get with all our photos, right? Is light, composition, and moment all wrapped up in one package. And just to give you guys an honest reflection of what we're going to teach, these workshops are not going to be about the details. Okay, they're not going to be about how to set your f-stop or how to link your flashes. The details are actually quite easy. They're easy to learn, right?
Yeah, no, what we decided to focus on with these is the big stuff, the big picture stuff,
Mhm.
because those details, those finer details are actually kind of the easy part. It's like,
I just said that.
what's that?
Stop looking over there and being distracted by.
Sorry, I just want to make sure we're coming
We
through.
are.
Okay. So for example,
Yes.
how do I work my camera?
Read your manual.
Right? How do I link my flashes?
Google it
How do I make short light?
and YouTube it. Right. There's your manual. There's a
That shit's
whole
everywhere.
host of places you can go to learn that stuff. And I mean, we could teach you that stuff as well, but we feel like that's not the best use. We feel like the best use of our time is to go much deeper than that.
Stuff you can't Google, right?
Yeah.
How do I see the light? Like, how do I feel it
Mhm.
intuitively? Right? How do I envision the potential?
Mhm.
How do I imagine what the possibilities are?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. You can't Google that shit.
Yeah. And most workshops do focus on the skills or the craft of photography, right? Setting up your camera, how to link your flashes, f-stop, shutter speeds, and all that stuff is really important. Like, we're not saying that stuff isn't important. Obviously, that's the foundation, knowing how to use your camera, how to take an actual photo. But we're going to be focusing more on the art aspect of photography, which is much harder to define. And when you
Comes
think
from the deeper stuff,
The
right?
deeper stuff,
the
yeah.
why of what we're doing.
yeah, because really, when you're photographing, this makes it sound so simple, but when you're photographing, you're really making 2 choices. You're deciding where to stand and when to click your shutter. Now, I'm oversimplifying things here, obviously, especially if we're incorporating flash and that sort of stuff. But at the heart of photography, especially natural light photography, that's it. Where do you stand? Where do you squat? Where do you lay down on the ground? And when do you press the shutter?
Mhm.
Simple to say, much harder to put into practice.
Yeah, and a big part of those 2 choices, deciding where to stand or sit or squat and when to click the shutter, has a lot to do with light, okay, and uncovering its hidden potential. So that's what today's workshop is about.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, give me 30 seconds here. I'm going to attempt to share our screen, and
we're going to dive in.
I got to escape out of this. I got to go here. Oh, I got to go here. Sorry, guys. I'm just turning my iPad into a remote here. And we're going to go share screen. Share.
And then play.
Play.
And then confirm that, oh, is this working? Okay.
Okay.
You should be able to see
I'm just going to put this.
our screen now and our webcam. Okay.
Okay.
So I just
let's make sure it works.
Confirm that that's coming through. Okay. I just want to see it before we really start. Welcome to the dark side. Here we go. I see it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's working.
Now, first of all, we can't actually show you, we can't show you the light, so to speak. What we can do though, is we can try to show you where it's hiding. Okay, we can show you how to learn and how to train yourself to be able to find it.
And find it in places where you probably wouldn't normally think you'd find it. Right?
It's kind of like a sixth sense, actually.
It is.
And so that's what we want to help you guys discover here. Now, how do we click to the next slide?
There we go.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to give you, for the sixth sense, we're going to give you 6 tasty tips for developing that sense of light. And the first one, you can just press the arrow here.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah. Learn to see the world the way our cameras see the world. Right. And this does not come naturally, because ever since we've been born, basically, is it changing on there?
It will. It's just the delay.
Sure. Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah. Learning to see the world the way our cameras see the world, right? And as human beings, when we're born, from very, very much the first time we're born, we're only born once. You can tell I'm a little bit nervous.
We're humans.
The first time.
Basically, we're humans trying to survive in a world full of objects.
Subjects
so we've
and
adapted
scenes.
To, exactly. We see subjects and scenes.
Yes.
Okay?
And so our instinct, I mean, the way we see the world and the way we photograph the world are very much interlinked, right? So if we see the world as subjects and scenes, we're just going to photograph the world as subjects and scenes.
That's what we instinctively do as photographers.
Yeah.
Right?
But our cameras don't see subjects and scenes, right? They don't recognize a book as a book. They don't recognize a tree as a tree. Cameras only see the world in light and shadow, right? That's all it is. And it's actually a really beautiful way to see the world. I remember sort of when this sort of ability to see light switched on in me. And at first I felt like it was a curse, because I was like seeing pictures everywhere, and I was seeing silhouettes everywhere, and I was seeing backlight everywhere. But once I got past the fact that I don't have to photograph it all the time, it's a really, really beautiful way to see and experience the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when it comes to photography, right, being able to see the world this way allows us, if we can see the world the way our camera sees the world, then we can make photos of things that the eye can't see. Okay, it's kind of like, analogy I like to use is it's like those magic eye, those 2-dimensional patterns that you stare at.
I like all those pixelated magic eye posters.
And if you shift your focus just right, a 3-dimensional image pops out at you, right?
If you don't know what he's talking about, Google it.
Google it. Okay?
Google magic eye poster.
But it can be super frustrating. But when you get it, like once you see it, you can't not see it. And light is a lot like that. Once you see it, you can't not see it, even without a camera in your hand, right? Which is great. It's a beautiful way to experience the world. But with a camera, that sense of light can guide you into where you go with your camera, and then what you do when you get there.
And when to press your shutter.
Exactly.
Right. So how do our cameras see the world? Our cameras see the world very different than our eyes see the world. And obviously our eye technology is much better than in the camera technology, right? Our eyes, I don't know the exact science behind this, so don't quote me on these numbers, but I think our eyes can see across something like 24 stops of dynamic range, right? I can look at a sunset. I can look at Lanny standing in front of a sunset, and I can see all the details in Lanny's face, and I can also see the sunset behind him. Our cameras aren't quite as good as our eyes, right? You can expose for the sunset, or you can expose for Lanny's face. And camera technology is obviously improving so that it has more dynamic range, but I really hope that it doesn't improve too much, because
the fact
using those limitations of our camera's dynamic range can create much more interesting visual pieces of art when it comes to photography.
Yeah. Yeah. That limited dynamic range is, I mean, we view it as a good thing. It's a gift to us, right? Because it allows us to lie with our cameras. Okay. We don't have to tell the complete, literal, virtual, visual truth, right? We can bend the truth to make it more interesting than meets the eye. Okay.
And
so
I actually prefer, I just got a new iPhone, and I prefer my old iPhone camera to my new iPhone camera, other than the portrait mode and wide angle lens feature. But in terms of the way it exposes, I prefer the older technology better because it's got less dynamic range, right? So that we can turn a scene like this into this, right? Those are the exact same location, right? One, we're exposed for the, one is about subjects and scenes. One is about light and shadow.
Yeah.
Light and shadow.
Another one.
Right.
Okay. So basically we can use our cameras to exaggerate, to accentuate, to tell the story with light and shadow instead of just subjects and scenes.
And how do we do this? This involves knowing how to use your camera, obviously, but
we turn the dials on our camera.
You can turn the dials, you can do manual exposure on your iPhone, but we'll talk about all that in a second.
Yeah.
More importantly, how do we learn to see the world this way? Well, the most important thing, as with anything, is with practice. And obviously practicing with your actual cameras is important, but it's important that you're a photographer 100% of the time, not just when you have your camera in your hand, right? If you can learn to see and experience this sixth sense all the time, it becomes second nature when you have a camera in your hand.
Yeah, and I hear a lot of photographers often worry about the fact that, oh, I haven't shot in a while, or I haven't been out training with my camera. If I don't pick up my camera, in between weddings and the weekends, then I'm not a real photographer. But you're training as a photographer all the time, regardless of whether or not you have a camera, because the essence of your photography is rooted in the fundamental way that you see the world. And so you can be training as a photographer all the time, especially when it comes to seeing the potential in light. Noticing
and observing, right?
Okay. So, and in terms of how to do that, guys, how we do that, we're going to share that with you at the end. Okay.
Yes.
So we'll come back to that. Let's move on to tasty tip number 2.
It's not where the light is, it's where the light is not.
And that's why we said that the light is hiding, so to speak, is because what really, the true potential is really not where the light is, it's where the light is not.
Yeah. And in this photo that we have up here as an example, I mean, this was pure and utter luck, by the way. The fact that, this shard of light came down on this mountain ridge on this couple. But what makes this photo really sing is, yes, obviously the shard of light on the couple, but what really makes it sing is the fact that light is hitting nowhere else, right? The light isn't hitting the mountain behind them, which means they're this bright highlight on a dark shadow.
Light is light only because there is dark, right?
Ooh, that's deep.
It's deep.
But not all light is created equal, right? There's soft light. This is a great example of soft light. And then there's hard light, right? There's pretty light. This is soft light again. And then there's hard light, right?
There's safe light. And then there's hard light. Okay.
Or easy light and hard light. And hard light, I feel like I especially see this in a lot of the beginner photographer groups. Hard light is not your enemy. Hard light is your friend, right? Soft light is our friend too. Soft light is fun. It's easy. You can just focus on the moments. You don't have to worry about, changing your exposure and all that stuff. But hard light is like your rebel best friend. It's the one that's going to create that impact in your photo.
Yeah.
Now, don't get us wrong. You know, when we're shooting outdoor ceremonies, usually at
High noon
in the middle of June, the longest day of the year, we absolutely
Hope
crave an overcast day, just as much as any other photographer. But not because it's good light, it's really because it's easy light, right? Soft is easy, but it's pretty flat because
Safe,
it's
pretty,
because it's everywhere, right?
Yeah, the light is going everywhere. That's literally why it's soft light.
Yeah. It's basically like an overcast day, right? The clouds just essentially turn that sun into a giant softbox.
Or like when you bounce your off-camera flash off a wall, right? The light goes everywhere, okay? Meaning there's no way that it doesn't go, meaning there's no absence of light. Yeah. So our camera sees it just the way our eyes see it.
Yeah.
Okay. It's easy because it's predictable. It's boring because it's expected. It looks just the way that we see it.
But we're still exposing for the highlights in those
scenes.
Well,
we haven't even mentioned that yet. Just hang on.
Okay, so hard light, by very definition, means that the light doesn't go everywhere, right? It's just going in a very specific part.
And that's where the magic is. Where the light is, but where it isn't.
Yes.
And the reason that hard light actually gets a bad rap is not because of the light, it's because of the direction. Okay, hard light looks like shit at high noon.
Yes, right? When you got those raccoon eyes and you got like the shadows of your
coming
eyelashes.
From straight above, right? It looks like shit when it's coming from directly on our camera, on camera flash, right? Like straight. It's not bad light, it's bad direction of light.
Yeah.
When that same hard light comes down onto the horizon, we love it.
It's magic hour,
right?
Yeah.
When we take that flash off our camera, boom. Right, hard light, when we control it, can be amazing, but only if we know how to make the most of it. Which
brings us to number 3, which I jumped ahead on a little bit here, which is expose for the highlights. Expose for the brightest part of what you're including in your frame.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's an important caveat to that in your frame, because often people will hear this concept and think, well, I got to expose for the brightest thing in this room or in this scene. Really what we're talking about is just what's included within the frame.
What you're choosing to include in your frame, expose for the highlights. If you guys want to see a really, really good and inspirational example of this, check out the movie trailer for The Darkest Hour. And it's a movie about Winston Churchill, and every single frame is exposed for the highlights. Actually, watch the entire movie. It is a lesson in exposing for the highlights.
And we want to drop in a few examples to illustrate what we're trying to describe here.
Yeah. So for example, this photo here is exposed for the midtones, right? You can see all the rock and the detail.
Or you could say it's properly exposed, right? The histograms where in the middle, where conventionally you would expect
is the same photo exposed for the highlights, right? Exposed for that little sliver of light that's just hitting the top of that rock. And it gives it much more texture, much more depth, right?
Yeah. And another way of describing this might be to say we're properly exposing for the highlights in the frame, but we're underexposing for everything else. Right. So the highlights are properly exposed and everything else, the midtones fall into darkness. Okay. And that's what can allow our images to really come to life.
Yeah.
And, why do we choose to do this? Almost everything that we choose to do as photographers, especially like documentary wedding photographers, is a matter of simplification. Simplification in art is really the essence of it. It's amplification through simplification, where we're reducing possibilities. Okay, and that's where creativity can shine. So that's why we've simplified our gear the way we have. That's why we've simplified most of the technical decisions that we make. That's why with exposure, we've simplified things down to almost always striving to expose for the highlights. Okay, it's like it takes our possibilities from infinity down to one thing, one simple idea to keep in mind, expose for the highlights. And that shapes
It shapes the way we compose our images.
Not just the exposure,
right?
the composition. Yes.
Exactly. Like, for example, in the image that we're showing up on the screen, there would be no purpose of including that highlight in the bottom right corner. And in fact, we didn't include that highlight in the bottom right corner until that hand came in, right? That hand gave that highlight a purpose. So it really, really shapes how we compose our images. This is just another before and after example here. Right?
Well, yeah, it's not a before and after, just honestly, so you know what we've done here, because if you go back, we didn't actually expose this way, but we've lifted the exposure a little bit. We wanted to show you kind of what the scene looked like to the eye, and then what it looks like basically when we dial down our exposure a stop or two.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, here again, right? This is just like a plaque it was in Japan at a memorial. And
all I've done, guys, here is only adjust the exposure slider. Okay, I haven't changed anything else. This isn't
your picture.
No, but I adjusted the exposure slider.
Oh, in post.
Yeah,
okay.
I just want to illustrate the effect of going dark, exposing for the highlights.
Yeah. Another example here for you, right? What drew me into this scene in the first place was the reflection off his glasses, because his glasses are reflecting the highlights. Right? So we can expose for that, and then we can edit for it as well, right? Yeah. By eliminating all those highlights that are distracting to the eye. Right?
Yeah, and if you haven't sort of grown accustomed to envisioning this, a good way to start is to just ask yourself, what does it look like if I go dark? Right? That's how we started to learn the potential. Is we go into a scene, go into a room, and ask ourselves that question, and then literally dial down our exposure and see what it looks like, see where the highlights are.
Yeah, and the presence of highlights is like equally important to the absence of highlights. Right? All those highlights within your frame, and we're going to show you some examples of this, all have to be a purpose, all have to have a purpose, else they shouldn't be included in your frame.
Yeah.
Just another example here.
You know,
exposed for the highlights, and then edited. Right? And often what we're asking ourselves when we're photographing this way is, where is the brightest spot? Right? Where is the brightest spot?
We're going to get to that.
And can I wait for something to happen there? Because our viewers' eyes are always drawn to the brightest spot, right? When we're looking at photography, when we're looking at other people's works or paintings or whatever, the viewer's eyes are drawn to what's in focus and what's the brightest spot.
Yeah. And that's biology. We're going to unpack that in a bit. One thing I wanted to just stress at this point is that what we're describing here, what we're talking about, isn't so much a style of photography. Okay, it's like, oh, well, I'm a light and airy photographer, I'm a dark and moody photographer. This is more, it's just good photography. This is the basics, the nuts and bolts of what photography is.
Exactly. Like when photography was first invented, it was exposing for light and shadow on paper. That's all it was, right? So
it's still that, only now it's on a sensor.
Now it's on a sensor, right? So this is nothing to do with a style of photography whatsoever. So don't sort of put any box around it in that regard.
Go to the next one. Even before photography, right? The Renaissance painters, right? They were exposing for highlights before exposing was invented.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Right. Now, of course, there's times when it makes sense to expose for the shadows, right? When there's no obvious highlight, or when there's a moment that's happened. Like in this case, there's no highlight in terms of light. The highlight itself is the moment, right? The metaphorical highlight is the moment. So we're just filling the frame with that. So we move our camera to fill our frame with that. And like, for example, if this photo had a lamp in the background or a lamp off to the side or a window, we would have intentionally excluded that, because that highlight would have drawn our eye away from this moment.
Yeah.
Right. And it really, really impacts how we compose our images, right? It has a huge impact into how we compose our images. And it guides where we stand with our camera, where we squat with our camera, where we lay down on the ground with our camera, and what we choose to include. Okay. So in every great photo, every highlight has to have a purpose. My eye is totally twitching. It's really distracting. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Oh God. Okay, and I mentioned this earlier, and I said we show you some examples, right? Every highlight has to have a purpose. So in this photo here, you can see Madeline's in a highlight. You can see Timmy's in a highlight. The top right corner, that highlight was useless. There was nothing, it was just a big bright piece of pavement. And so I intentionally waited for a biker to bike by and cast his shadow. And then there's a reason to include that highlight in the frame. If that biker wasn't there, there'd be no point to include that section in the frame.
And so it would recompose to exclude in that situation, right?
Yeah. Another example here, right? Every single window pane, the highlights have a purpose. Lanny actually compositionally made this image because he walked in and filled a highlight that wouldn't have any purpose without him in there.
Now, I didn't do that for Eric and I.
No, he didn't.
This is just
just
entirely
photo bombing me, which he does all the time.
An accidental photo bomb.
Yeah,
but she used it, right?
Yeah. Again, this is in a church. We weren't allowed to move a lot in this church at all, and I was sitting here for a long time. That window was driving me nuts, and in most of the frames, I didn't have the window in there. But I noticed when the priest would put up his hand, he would give that highlight a purpose, right? Without his hand there, that window is useless. It has no purpose in the frame. With his hand there, it gives the highlight a purpose.
Mm-hmm. So we should talk now about how we do this. Like, how do we expose for the highlights with our camera?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain the
order
of operations?
The order of operations we use on our camera, as long as we're shooting natural light, which is most of the time, is we choose our ISO, we choose our aperture. That's our storytelling device. That's the one that we want full control over. And then we use our shutter speed to get the exposure that we're looking for.
So even though we're shooting in manual, we're only adjusting one thing, right? One thing on the fly, unless something changes. If we go into a new lighting environment, we'll go back and change the ISO, right? Mm-hmm. If we decide, oh, we need to F it up because we're trying to layer multiple stories, we might go and change the aperture. But once we kind of get it dialed in, and we're just reacting to the moments in the light, we're just moving that shutter speed dial, okay?
Yeah.
Shooting in manual really helped us dial in that attention to light and the minute micro changes, because, you know, when we were using aperture priority, our camera was doing this for us. So we didn't have to, we didn't have to be that attuned. Of course, if there was a big change, we would use exposure compensation. But once we got into manual, it became a muscle memory thing that we unconsciously noticed that, oh, the light just kind of got a little bit darker here in this area. So I roll the, roll the dial a little bit.
Yeah, but we can use this concept with photographing with our phones as well. It doesn't always have to be with, can you pass me my phone? Speaking of which, with our SLR, right? So a lot of people don't know this, but you can manually adjust your exposure on your phone, right? So if I want to adjust my exposure for the window on the back, you guys can't see.
Hold it right up close.
They can't see because I'm tiny in the corner. I'll show you when we're full screen.
Just explain it though.
But you just press and hold on the spot that you want it exposed for until a little yellow box comes up. And then you can pull down your exposure to darken the entire scene.
Slide up or down.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've got a little video here actually that shows you on my phone using this manual exposure and how that absence of light is just as important as the presence of light. So we'll show that to you now.
Push play or just push like that?
I think that. So I'm in the kitchen here. I'm just going into the bathroom here. There's no natural light in here whatsoever.
This was 15 minutes ago.
This was 15 minutes ago. We got a dirty mirror. Sorry. So first thing I'm doing is I'm turning off the light, right? Absence of light is just as important. The bathroom's flooded with light. I'm closing the door so that I just have a nice little sliver of light in there. Now I'm adjusting my exposure, bringing that exposure down to where I want it, right? And then this is the photo I end up with. Of course, I've given it a little edit there, but that is essentially what we're doing, whether you're doing it with your phone or you're doing it with your camera. Okay.
So we're exposing for the highlights, okay, which guides our exposures and our compositions. And when we do that, everything else gets simplified down to tasty tip number 4, which is highlights on shadows and shadows on highlights. Okay, you can see in this example here.
So Lanny is a highlight on a shadow,
dark background,
right? And the kids are shadows on the highlight, the sky.
That's right.
And this is another example, right? Lanny again is a shadow. Oh no, you're the shadow this time. Lanny's a shadow, right? He's silhouetted, but he's on that bright sky. And then Madeline is highlighted, but on a dark background. And those are really important because, you know, if Madeline were on a bright background, she wouldn't pop nearly as much. And obviously if Lanny were on a shadowy background, it would just be all black.
And this is just, you know, working on the innate biology of our eyes and, you know, where they're drawn and how it works, and taking advantage of the way that our cameras see that reduced dynamic range allows us to expose like this. This is not the way it looked, right? We could see, Erica could see detail all over my skin and Madeline's and everything, but by choosing to expose for the highlights and being careful to place highlights on shadows and shadows on highlights, we can make an image like this.
Or this, right? Again, we got this beautiful backlight and they're on this nice, Lanny and Madeline are in this nice dark background. And the only reason I decided to include the foreground here is because their shadows are on the highlight. And
highlights on the shadows, okay, in the same frame. The other one, this is kind of the ambient light, exposed for the ambient light in the room.
Yeah, exposed for the ambient light in the room.
But noticing the potential. Exposed for the highlights. Now we've got highlight on shadow.
Yeah, we've got Julian over here, highlight on shadow, and then we got the translator over here, shadow on highlight.
Yeah.
One more example here. Madeline's in the highlight, and the flag is the highlight on the dark background.
Yeah. Now, we don't always have both. It's great when you can have shadows on highlights and highlights and shadows in the same frame, but often it's just one or the other, right?
Yes.
So let's first look at these one at a time here, highlights on shadows. And in this case, we're looking for dark backgrounds on which to highlight our subject matter, okay? Whether they're lit by the sun or the flash, we're always looking for ways to arrange things, get things to line up, to have highlights on shadows.
Yeah,
okay?
even when we're doing like safe portraits, right? Where we're just getting a nice picture of this couple smiling and looking at the camera, we're always looking for the highlight on the dark background. So we're looking for backlight on a dark background.
Yeah.
Right.
Or so sidelight on dark background.
Or sidelight. Yeah. Just a few examples for you here.
Yeah. Highlights on shadows, exposing for the highlights and carefully trying to move the camera in a way to place those highlights on a shadow.
Yeah. And a lot of these guys are just iPhone photos.
These are just, yeah. Some of you may know this legend, legendary photographer.
Yeah.
Highlights on shadows.
On dark background.
On dark background. Yeah.
Or shadows.
For those highlights, right? Seeing often when we're, we're exploring out in the, the old towns in Europe and we'll see these highlights, right? These shards of light coming through the alleyways. And Eric and I will both see and notice it at the same time. And we almost kind of look at each other. It's like, okay, well, who gets to shoot this? And one of us will stay there with the camera and the other one of us will kind of walk with the kids and kind of lead them through the highlights. And the other one will obviously pre-focus on that highlight, expose for that highlight, wait for them to walk through there, right?
But the trick is noticing them, right? Yeah. And so we're showing you some really obvious examples, but we're also showing you some not so obvious examples.
Highlight on shadow.
Okay. If you look at her hand and her foot and her dress, it's not the fact that she's carrying the dress up the stairs, it's that she's in the sun and the deck is in the shade. And
if we weren't attuned to that, dialed into noticing that, we never would have noticed this, right? This image would never have happened because that wouldn't have jumped out at us as, oh, wow, look at that. So we're often asking ourselves, where can we light our subjects on a dark background? Or
not necessarily light them, but where is the light?
Have them lit.
Have them lit on the dark background. Yeah. And then of course the opposite, which is shadow on highlight.
Right. Here's an example.
Which is essentially silhouette, right? A shadow on a highlight. Shadow on highlight.
Exposing for the highlights, and our subject matter is in the shade. Very straightforward stuff. That silhouettes is a whole thing.
These are all natural light, guys. Highlights.
Okay.
Oh, now you guys get to see a picture.
Okay.
So Lanny does bring out the camera once in a while. I'm in so few family photos, like hardly any People always ask me, where are you in all the family photos? But then I get in the shower and Lanny starts taking photos of me. So you guys get to see pictures of me in the shower.
But I threw these in here because a good example of this idea of shadows on highlights. You know, obviously it's pretty crappy light in this little bathroom.
And I'm really going to treasure this photo.
But, you know, we notice the highlights, right? Can we exclude the highlight? Because otherwise it's a distraction. Or can we use the highlight? In this case, I chose to move myself into a position so that I can have my subject on the highlight. And then what am I going to do? My wife. And then what am I going to do? I'm going to expose for that highlight. Okay. And the midtones fall into darkness. And I have an interesting photograph that looks and feels more interesting than it looked to the eye.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Here's another example. And this, again, it just boils down to where are we putting our cameras and when are we pressing the shutter, right? So this is a typical sort of beach scene.
I just wanted to mention that often when we're outdoors shooting, whether it's hanging out at the beach or we're actually on a couple shoot, one of the most common questions we're asking, we're someplace obviously, but often it's the sky itself. So we're often asking ourselves, how can we get our subject matter up onto the sky?
Yeah.
Okay. Because that's the highlight. So
this next photo is the exact same beach, except instead of standing here front and center to the subject, all we did was we moved way over to the right of Madeline. So more towards the beach so that we could shoot towards the water
and get down
right?
low.
And get down low and then expose for those highlights.
Yeah.
Right?
And just go back because I want to just like, this is basically kind of how it looked or how it would look if you're exposed for the skin, right?
And how it looks to our eye.
Yeah. But literally all I've done here is drag the exposure slider down and post. That's the only change I made to demonstrate the impact of going dark and exposing for the highlights.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Another example here. So this is just a museum that we were at with the kids, right? So we've got, you can see there's an obvious highlight with the lights, the museum lighting that's on those masks there, right? Shooting this direction, couldn't get Timmy in a highlight. That's exposed for the highlights, but there's really no point including Timmy in this frame. But if I turned the other direction and shot from the other side, there's a highlight on the ground, right? Here I'm exposed for skin tones, and all we do is we just drop the exposure. And now we're using all those highlights in our frame for a specific purpose. Yeah.
And again, what allows this to happen is you get tuned into noticing those highlights. They become like beacons, like, whoa, there's a hot highlight right over there. And that guides us into where we go with our camera to try to line things up to make an impactful image.
Yeah.
Okay. And the
sky's the limit.
It can be great fun just playing around, noticing light and shadow, exposing for highlights, using those shadows to help us tell the stories.
Shadows on highlight. And the ice cream cone is actually on the dark background, so it's highlight on shadow too. This is just having some fun.
Shadows on highlights, right? In this case, here's an example of, where we've, this is a portrait. So we had our bride lay in this highlight, right?
Which is just from a fence, actually.
Well, the highlight is from the sun.
From the sun shining through a fence.
But the first thing we noticed before she went there, obviously, was this pattern, right? Mm-hmm. It's casting the shadow on there, mm-hmm. shadows on the highlight. Mm-hmm. Now, sorry.
Yeah, and when you photograph it this way, you really only have to set your exposure once. Right? You set your exposure for the brightest part of the scene. And in this case, the brightest part of the scene is sky.
Particularly if you're outdoors in
or
hard light.
Sometimes I'll just set my exposure for a sunny patch on the ground, like a sunny patch of grass. Yeah. Right. And then we're set up for silhouettes if our subject is in the shade, in this case, Malin. And we're set up for proper skin tones if our subject is in hard light, like the other boy in the swing.
Yeah, I remember when I realized that it was a game changer because it used to always be changing exposure mm-hmm. up and down. But then once we realized we just dial it in for the highlights, we can do both of these interesting things without changing anything. Yep. Here's an example, right?
Another example, yeah.
Exposure is set for the highlights. And so when Timmy is in the direct sun like he is here, I'm properly exposed for his face. But when I move around and put the sun in, hide the sun in behind him without even changing my exposure, I'm set up for backlit silhouettes. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. So
which brings us
highlights on shadows, shadows on highlights. Mm-hmm. It can be a little bit tricky in some situations because
in a lot of situations, it
well,
can be
especially with
tricky, for
natural
sure.
light, right?
Yeah.
Because we're at the whim of natural light. We can't move the sun. We can't move the window, right? So we've got to do our best to adapt as best we can. But what happens when you can move the light, right?
Yeah.
And that brings us into the tasty tip number 5,
which is create your own highlights, right? But what's really
And
important, so many people, want to learn off-camera flash from us. I'd say that's probably the most common thing that people want to learn from us. People are usually very, very surprised to hear that for the majority of the wedding day, other than speeches and dance floor, we don't really use flash, hardly at all, I would say. And what's also really important is that in order to shoot flash photography really well, you need to master shooting natural light really well and shooting for those highlights. Like being able to shoot highlights like we just described is going to impact your flash photography in more ways than us just teaching you flash photography.
Right, because learning and figuring out the mechanics of off-camera flash is one thing. So you know how to execute it, right?
Again, YouTube.
Dial it in, right? But until you're able to see and appreciate the potential of light, you're really not able to do much of anything super interesting with your off-camera flash, right? So, but what we've decided to do, I think we've got for you here is, well, here first I'll just show a couple examples, and then I'll kind of break it down a little bit. But just another example of, again, highlights on shadows, shadows on highlights. In this case, it's a combination of the natural highlights and shadows combined with ones that we're making ourselves. Okay, so you can see that we've got we've exposed for the highlights in the scene, right? And the sky. And so our subjects that are in the shade are silhouetted on that sky, right? And those that are in the sun are properly exposed for their skin. But then we noticed that there was this big natural shadow. And so,
triangular shadow.
Yeah. So what we tried to do, it worked in this situation, was to have our couple go into that shade and paint with our own highlights. Okay. Light them up with a flash within that shadow.
Now, yeah, we're not going to get into the mechanics of this too much, especially with a shot like that, because that actually required a very, very powerful flash. But it's like Lanny said, it's seeing the potential. And essentially what we're doing is the same series of steps. Okay. We're seeing the highlights and we're exposing for those highlights.
That's step one.
That's step one. There is a caveat in there. And again, we're not going to go into this because YouTube's for that. Shutter speed matters now. Shutter speed matters because you're bringing in your flash. And so you have to. So
step one is expose for the highlights with your shutter speed at 1/200th of a second or slower, or whatever the flash sync speed of your camera happens to be. Okay. So 1/200th of a second, right? And then F it up to
your f-stop until you're exposed for those highlights. In this case, the sky.
The sky. That brings up the drama, right? Exposed for highlights, just like we always do. And that's step one. That's essentially the canvas. That's the ambient light that you're exposed for.
And then step two, add your light. Add your highlight. Okay. In this case, it's a highlight against the wall.
Yeah.
Right. In this case, it's a highlight that's casting it's a flash behind the bride who's dancing, creating a highlight of rim light around her, but also casting shadows.
Yeah. And the key there is, with that kind of two-step process, is you do one at a time and you don't do them together. Okay. So first,
let's not get
just quickly.
technical.
No, not too technical. No, this is simplifying. Okay. Because the whole reason you want to do these two steps independently is because it simplifies matters. It's step one, 1/200th of a second, F it up to expose for the highlights and go dark. That's your canvas. Okay. Then you're going to paint with light by turning on your flash, positioning it, controlling it with a grid, right? So it only goes where you want it and not where you don't want it. But then in order to dial in that light just the way you want it, don't touch your camera settings.
This is a whole other workshop on your own. I think you're going too detailed.
Let me just finish.
You're going too detailed.
You only want to turn your flash up or down. Anyways, okay.
Now all the questions are going to come in. Don't ask us questions about this.
I wasn't supposed to get
this is not a workshop about how to use flash, and it's not a workshop. It's a workshop about seeing the potential, right? And the concepts with our flash photography is very similar to our concepts with the natural light photography. For example, Rule number 4, highlight on shadow, right? We're doing the exact same thing with the flash. We've got the highlight, but it's on a shadow background.
Yeah, and we're controlling those highlights independently.
Yes.
Okay, so what is this? I can't see that.
Okay, so a lot of us train
Number
to
6.
use our cameras, right? Like I said this at the beginning, a lot of most of the workshops we take are on how to use our cameras, how to link our flashes, how to technically pull things off as a photographer. And of course, that is an important part of photography. It's a very, very important part of
How to
photography.
operate our cameras.
But once you get beyond that, once you get beyond knowing how to use your cameras, the biggest impact you can have on your photography is training yourself to see, training yourself to observe things that you wouldn't normally have observed, including light and shadow.
Yeah.
And then we'll get into the composition in the moment in the next time. So we've got a fun little activity associated
it's
with
an exercise. It's a training exercise. This is essentially how we train and how we trained ourselves to be able to see light.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically it's called light as subject. Okay, this is if you choose to accept your challenge is to photograph light as your subject.
Yes.
So what that means is, you want to explain it or do you want me?
You can.
Okay, what that means is you're going to set out whenever, wherever you like, okay, in your home, outside, downtown, wherever, hard light, soft light, whatever.
Go and do it right now. Go spend 10 minutes, like literally stop the recording and do 10 minutes doing this right now. And
you don't even have to have your camera, or maybe you just bring your iPhone camera. You could bring your camera if you want, but first you only want to be using your eyes. Okay. And what the whole point of the exercise is to try to turn off your mind from seeing subjects and scenes and just tune into noticing light and shadow. And the light itself becomes your subject. Mm-hmm. And this might take 10, 20, 30 minutes, an hour before you really start to notice it. And it's not just about the quantity of light, like a moth to flame going straight into the brightest highlights on the darkest shadows. It's noticing the subtle interplay between light and shadow. It can be really quite subtle. Mm-hmm. And once you start to see that, then part B would be to photograph it by
exposing for the highlights.
Yeah.
Right. And what we'll do is we'll create a thread where you guys can post all your photos. We'll do that right after we're done with the live here. There will be a prize, so try it. I just want to, while we have this picture up, because people are probably wondering what the hell's happening here. We're training. And this was just a photograph that we took on our porch after a rainstorm. And we have this glass top patio table, and the glass top patio table was full of water droplets from the rain. And so we went and laid underneath the glass top table and exposed for those highlights.
Okay. So I think now we stop screen share.
Okay. So stop share, right? And escape. And let's go back here. There we are.
And are we doing Q&A?
Oh, okay. So it's going to be tricky. We can do a few questions. Here's the rules. You can't ask us what our settings were for a photo. Okay. That's not a valid question.
Not because we want to answer that, but because it's just
not the point of this workshop.
No.
Right?
No.
Because it just doesn't matter, because we're trying to learn how to see differently. So if you do have a question, we'll keep our eye on the comments here. What I'd like you to do is type it in the comments with a big capital Q, because there's 220 comments. And in order for us to be able to find a question, you need a big capital Q.
Yeah. And just while those questions are coming in, before I see, do you want to just keep it?
They're coming in.
They are?
Yeah, just click on here.
Way.
Click on here, and then, here, quick, plug your computer in.
I'm dying. I'm dying.
You're at 2%.
Okay.
Why isn't the,
maybe on here I can see the questions. We're going to try to do.
So here's one. Exposing for the highlights is to show, see, it disappears. That's the problem.
They disappear faster than we can read them.
Okay, here we go. Okay, Josh. So in general, the general rule is shutter speed should be at a minimum of your focal length. Shooting 35, you should not be lower than 1/35 of a second or faster. If your lens,
That's not a question.
oh, that's not a question.
It's not a question.
Okay.
Q, there's a question.
There's a question.
David,
Okay.
how do I convince my wife to let me take pictures of her in the shower?
You don't ask.
Yeah, you just do it.
Just do it. Don't ask for permission. Beg for forgiveness later.
Yeah. What are you exposing for in the midday, high sun, open field, no shade spot, like an outdoor ceremony? Okay, so an outdoor ceremony, high noon, midday, open sun. For the most part, we're trying to expose for the highlights. Okay.
Yes and no. Like if the sun is way, way high up in the sky, we are always still trying to get that sun behind our subject. Right. So that we have this halo of light around our person as opposed to the harsh shadows on the face, which is, so we are, even when the sun is really, really high in the sky, we can try and get that sun behind our subject. And then we are more exposing for skin tones in that case. But you can't silhouette.
Yeah. But in terms of spot metering, we don't actually meter. Really, I don't even know what metering mode we use. We eyeball it. Now with our mirrorless, we can eyeball it right in there. In the EVF itself, with the SLRs, we had to do a quick chimp to check our exposure. So we're basically exposed to taste, and we dial it up or down from there. We don't.
So we didn't show, Jen, this is from Jen, this question. We didn't show a lot of examples in that scenario, Jen. And there's a reason, because it is very hard to shoot this way in high noon, right? If there's, like, for instance, if you're in a building that has a covered patio, right? And then you can use the shadow of the patio in combination with the hard light of midday. But if you're just out midday and there's no light and shadow, the sun's just high in the sky and the shadows are about this long, there's really nothing to do. We try and find areas where there's light and shadow. We'll go to a forest where there's shards of light coming in. We'll try and, find some sort of structure that we can use so that we can have that contrast of light and shadow with the field. But if there's nothing, then there's nothing.
Okay. I'm trying to decide, like, if I should just focus on questions that are related.
Yes.
Okay. So,
one of the questions was spot metering or histogram. Neither. I've never looked at my histogram, and I don't really even know what spot metering is.
Oh man, it's so hard to read these because they come in faster than.
Yeah.
Does having a EVF make finding light easier? Would you recommend mirrorless? We'd recommend mirrorless personally, but not because it makes finding light easier necessarily. It does.
It's definitely one of the advantages of it.
You can see it. It means you literally never have to take your eye off the EVF if you don't want to, right? To check exposure. But I mean, even with your smartphone camera, you can do that, right? You can dial it in, you can see. With an SLR, you don't have that advantage. So
it definitely does help you see it.
Many other reasons that we'd personally recommend moving to mirrorless, mostly around the autofocusing capabilities.
Let's just do 3 more questions. Just pick 3. Oh gosh.
Oh, here's one. Are all your wedding gallery photos exposed this way, or do you do safe photos for clients? We've shown you today some, fairly dramatic examples that help us demonstrate what we're trying to describe here. But of course, the gallery that we deliver to our client, a wedding couple, the 1,000 images that they receive, there's going to be all kinds of different, exposures and whatnot. But when you say safe, we think of this, we think of pretty much everything that we showed actually as safe. Safe doesn't have to be boring. Yeah.
And the concepts, even for more standard shots where it's not extreme light and shadow, because we have showed it some, like Lanny and I exposed right now, right? The concepts are the same. We have filled the frame with us. Yeah. We have chosen a lens to eliminate all the other highlights that are distracting. I wish we could get rid of those lights behind us.
Yeah. But I would say one of the easiest way to get a sense of, kind of the body of work that we create for our couples would be to just have a look at some of our wedding blog posts, because that's a fairly representative sample right? And you'll see, you know, obviously we don't silhouette everything, right? We silhouette when it makes sense to do so, right? So yeah, it's a healthy mix, but safe doesn't have to be boring, right?
Yeah, do that one by Petra.
So how long did that take you to learn seeing the light?
So how long did it take to learn seeing the light? Are you even aware of being able to see it when you started making photos? So it's not a destination. It's not like all of a sudden, okay, I see the light now. I see the light.
We're still learning.
Like it's a constant practice, right? It's like when you talk to a yoga teacher, you don't say, how long did you practice yoga until you became a master, right? Becoming a master requires practicing all the time and improving all the time and striving for betterment all the time. So,
and it waxes and wanes, honestly. I mean, for me personally, like sometimes at the start of a shoot or at the start of a wedding, it takes me a while to get back in that zone, like to dial back in. It's almost like a mental switch that I have to consciously make. And it doesn't happen like that. It's a little bit of paying attention, and then it starts to come back and you start to dial into that light and shadow. And the more frequently you do this, with or without a camera, adjusting your life, the easier it is to dial it in when you need to, right? But yeah, there wasn't like a one definitive moment. But I do remember when I was on my foundation assignment, that was kind of the first and only time that I'd spent like literally 48 hours straight. Well, wow. I slept, but for 2 days, I did nothing but pay attention to light and shadow. I was on a documentary assignment, and I was just there to observe with my camera and record. And so all I did for basically 2 days was watch light and shadow, and that really helped it pop out for me from that point on.
Yeah. I've seen a bunch of questions asking whether this workshop is recorded. Oh, damn, I forgot to press record on Zoom. But the recording will be kept in the Facebook group for you guys to watch at a later date for a few days. It's not going to be there indefinitely, but it'll stay there.
Here's a cool question. Do you guys increase HDR in pics? Sometimes, but usually we decrease it. Honestly, I mean, editing is a whole other thing, but just like, you know, our goals of editing are the exact same as our goals of photography. Okay. Where, you know, we're going for maximum impact, maximum visual, emotional impact. And that's why we shoot the way we shoot. It's why we expose the way we expose. When it comes time to edit, it's the same goal. And so while we're taking advantage of our camera's reduced dynamic range compared to our eyes to be able to show interesting photographs that our eyes aren't accustomed to seeing, we're doing the same thing in post, often by diminishing that dynamic range even more, dropping the shadows, right? Lifting the highlights.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So we're going to cut it off there because there's literally like 100 more questions. Okay. We might try and answer a few in the comments as well. But
oh, here's a good question. I'll just quickly, because this will lead into what's to come. How often are you seeing the light and then waiting for a moment to happen in that light? I find that I see the light, but then get impatient for an interesting use of it. Okay, this is a question that's kind of leaning into the heart of what the Holy Grail workshop is going to be all about. Yes. It's like, these are the fundamental pillars of what makes a compelling photograph: light, composition, and moment. And it's rare, but it's the trifecta that we're striving for. Is we want all three in one frame. How do we do that? There's a whole, I mean, that's a whole art. There's a whole strategy behind that. And so,
it doesn't always happen. In fact, I would say 90% of the time we're waiting for something to happen in the light. It doesn't happen, right? But we're ready for when that 10% of the time when it does. So yes, we are waiting for things to happen in light often, not at the expense of missing other moments. If there's like, it kind of, it boils down to, really what else is going on. And this is getting a little bit away from this.
It's very situational.
It's very situational. And as any of our workshop students will tell you, our answer to every single question is it depends, because it really does. But you know, if I'm in a room and let's say I'm in the bride prep and I see this potential for this shot with something in the highlight, I will be aware of that highlight. Like I'll know that highlight is there. And I'll be like mentally ready to say, if something happens around that highlight, I'm going to be ready for it, or I'm going to try and be ready for it. but not at the expense of all the other moments happening in the room. And if I'm sitting there waiting and the bride is having a moment with her great grandmother, who's maybe it's the last wedding she's ever coming to, I'm not going to wait there at the expense of missing this moment. So it's really situational.
Yeah. So in a way, it's like, what is the most important aspect of the story here? If it's emotional moments, then the order of kind of how we're trying to achieve things is goes moment and then light and composition, secondary, right? Whereas if, you know, there's no real impactful moments happening necessarily, there's no like important story, if it's kind of just, or we've already told those stories and we're trying to do something different, then it's light and composition that come first and the moment is secondary.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
and I'd say,
situational.
yeah. And
But
I'd say
is,
light and composition. So composition is our next workshop. I mean, they are so intertwined. It's hard to separate them as different subjects because the light impacts our composition and the composition impacts our light. They both really impact each other. So that's what we're going to go into in the next workshop, which is on September 21st.
Yes.
Same time?
Same time.
Same time.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And then the next one,
hopefully we will have a better internet connection by then, and you'll be able to see full definition of our faces and our wrinkles.
Okay, so yeah, that's the 21st. Then we're gonna focus on moments and posing.
Moments and posing, yeah.
Because
we're going to talk, those are going to be intertwined for sure.
On the 5th, okay,
October 5th.
And then the last one is the Holy Grail. Like, how do we try to bring all of this together? Okay, and that's going to be on October 18th.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you everybody who tuned in and everybody who's watching the replay. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate your questions, and hopefully we'll see some of you back here for the next one.
Yeah. And if there's anything you need or any questions you have, feel free to reach out.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.